I'm Art Baughard, and first of all, I want to thank you all for inviting us and sharing some of this with you. You will notice right off that I'm not a gifted speaker. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. And as I was telling Dale, I don't do this for a living, and if I did, I'd starve to death. So again, thank you very much. And I joined the U.S. Navy in August of 1942 and was discharged in November 45. I've never said too much about this, seriously, to my kids. I got two that are already retired. And because I didn't see anything really very special about it. We got kicked in the butt over there initially, and we just weren't going to take it. Patriotism, you wouldn't believe, that prevailed at that time. I didn't graduate with my high school class. I just quit school and joined the Navy. I did the education thing later. But everybody was doing it, and then the women were working. It was just a mass effort that we had to do. I never talked to the kids about it. I just didn't think too much of it. But in the past several years, they have closed in on the veterans. They're thanking veterans now for what they're doing, past and present. So I'm thankful for that. Now, just a couple words about history. Hirohito, I guess I'm pronouncing that correctly, wanted to occupy the western rim of the Pacific. And he didn't have the resources. He needed rubber and he needed oil. So 1937, they called it the Rape of Nanking. The Japanese went into China and just shot all over them. And that was the start of it. Then Hitler, still upset about what happened to him after World War I, he decided he's going to make it up. And they gave him Czechoslovakia, and he wasn't satisfied. In 1939, he went into Poland and took that. That was started the whole thing. At the meantime, we were suffering through a horrendous depression. Some of you guys, I think, probably remember a little bit of that. But it was terrible. You just wouldn't believe how the people suffered from that thing. But anyway, it was coming out of it because we were supplying England at that time with ammunition and arms and equipment. And it kind of brought us out of the recession. But when this happened on December the 7th, when those little devils came over here and killed about 2,500 guys, that's when on December the 8th, Franklin D. Roosevelt, in fact, I have a copy of it here, convened Congress, and he wanted to declare war, and unanimous. I have a copy here, and you guys are welcome to look at this if you want to. This is the notes that he used. He didn't have teleprompters like they use today, and he made all the notes, the note changes on this thing. All except on the "So Help Us God." He put that in on his own. We were supplying England and some of the allies over there with the equipment, and under this Lend-Lease policy. Then on December the 7th, the Pearl Harbor thing happened. It was a bright, and I remember it well, seriously. I think I was only 17 years old. But it was a nice, bright, sunny afternoon on Sunday when these guys hit over there. Of course, it's a time change. They did it in the morning. But in the meantime, you know, they were negotiating with the American people for a peace, and all the time they were negotiating, I think it was about 5 carriers and a whole fleet that was coming in and bombing Pearl Harbor. But of course, at that time, we didn't have the communications that we have today, the instant communication. So it took a while to get all the details. They publish a special paper to get it. You know, it happens, you know it in 30 seconds. Initially, I wanted to join the Marines. And I don't know if any of you guys are Marines here or not, but I wanted to. But anyway, at that time, they were still being very particular in accepting recruits. And I had a problem with a couple of teeth, and seriously, they said, we'll call you. Well, when I was in boot camp in the Navy, my mother got a postcard that said, come on back, we'll talk to you now. They lowered their requirements a tad. We left at that time, you know, they had airplanes, but you didn't, the only travel means you had was with a railroad. And I don't know if any of you remember it, from Akron area, there was an old depot down off Market Street where the trains came in. And there was about 25 of us. I put on here kids, and we were all kids, just young guys, didn't know any different. And I took a train to Cleveland. And there we picked up a larger group and set off then for a Great Lakes Training Center, just north of Chicago. After 9 weeks of boot camp, and I don't know if any of you guys are in the, I'm sure some of you went through the boot camp in the Navy, right, sailor? It taught you the difference between a hatch and a door and a port and a window and a deck and a floor. And you always took the swab fore and aft. You didn't go east to west or south, port to starboard. That's what boot camp was. Although I had a note in here, we were assigned to Camp Green Bay, and that camp had just opened, and they were still working on it somewhat, and there was mud up to, you know, where it goes, and of course every Saturday, again, you know, that you always had an inspection. You know, you always brush your teeth and put on your clean underwear, and they had an inspection. Well, we used to call them rubbers, and some people called them overshoes. But the first thing they did, they took your shoes and put a heavy sole on it, and then you give you these rubbers to wear. Well, I had them sitting up above my sea bag on the rack there, and they had an inspection they picked up, and sure enough, in that tread, there was a little mud on it. I didn't clean all the mud off of it. Well, 3 nights, with a bunch of other guys, on what they call the grinder. You guys understand that. And you carried this M1, a 9-pound rifle. And you worked over there, boy, I mean, till the sun went down. You know, butts, muzzle, butts, chest. Of course, you were young and you could do it then. I'll get on to it here. I survived boot camp like everybody else did, and it wasn't that bad. I've got to go back to one guy. You guys will remember this, the Flying Five. The first pay you got was a $5 bill. And sure enough, you got a haircut and toothpaste and something, they took your $5 away from you. You had to buy it. Of course, we were making $21 a month. That was a lot of money. Oh, after going back, after boot leave for assignment, I volunteered for submarine service. Somebody had mentioned to it that they were making more money and they were paying a little better. And I thought, well, I'll give that a shot. It wouldn't bother me. But I got rejected that, and then I ended up at an air station in Oklahoma. And that's the way the Navy operates. You volunteer for submarine service. This was the start of assembling an air wing, and get into it now. The pilots trained in Traverse City, Michigan, and they were proud of that little city. But anyway, I was in what they call ship's company, and we'd go over at the flight line and fly with these guys. They had to put in so many hours of training. And they a fighter plane, you could get 2 people in it. And they'd say, if you get sick, just use your hat. So, in your hat. But we'd fly down to Texas, Eagle Mountain Lake. There was a Marine Corps Air Station down there. And we go down there, refuel, and fly back. But that's what we did in the evenings. The little town called Clinton, Oklahoma. And this is back in Prohibition. They had beer. It was, they called it near beer. You'd put salt in it to make it rise. So we'd go to a bar and order a glass of beer and put salt in it. The ship's company was assigned to do the duties of the base. And after I got cut down a couple of times and things I volunteered for, I just waited, and they assigned me to the carpenter shop. I paid off as a carpenter's mate, 2nd class, and I served on a steel ship. So, that's the way the Navy operated. They worked with the civilians there. They're super people. In the weekends, they'd invite you home with them. They didn't live around this little Clinton, Elk City. It was on Route 66, incidentally, old Route 66. And invite us home, feed us. They'd take 1 or 2 guys every week. They'd invite you home. And good eating, really good eating. We left Oklahoma in February '43 and went to San Pedro, California, a receiving station. And it was right next to a fishing cannery. And boy, you think the smell, that was terrible. But you got used to it. You wouldn't believe it, but we did. They kept us very busy. Of course, you found out later that they dream up things for you to do to keep you out of trouble. And we went to a firefighting school and a damage control school. Well, the damage control, they told you how to repair ships. If you took a hit, you could take a mattress and stuff it in the hole and things like that. But the one, every morning they'd take us by bus up the coast to Port Hueneme. They had a firefighting school up there. And you worked in teams. And when there was 5 or 6 guys on a team, and they give you what they called a handy billy. I don't know if you guys heard of them or not, but there was a pump. And you had to connect these hoses together. You screw it. They didn't, they had to. Well, I was the one that was connecting the hose to get into this water, and I didn't get it connected, and we lost. So I ended up in 3 feet of oil. They just dunked me in that sucker. I went back to the ship, just an oil rag. Let's see. Finally, the ship was ready. We took it on a shakedown cruise, and it was made by Kaiser. Maybe you guys have heard of them, the Kaiser Fraser. But and I noticed back there, and I always referred to a destroyer as a tin can. But that's what they called us, because these ships, you wouldn't believe how they were put together, but they built them. How fast they did it, how many a day they put out. But we got it, and it was a good ship. We had a crew of about 800 men and carried up to 25 to 28 planes. The ships were short, so it required a very good precision pilot to land on these things. And we lost a few. We saved the pilots, but we lost we lost the planes. The carriers became the main weapons soon in the war because, the Japs ruined all of our battleships until they made the new ones, the Missouri and the Iowa and the Wisconsin. We started in our duties of, engagements in the Marianas, the Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. The first time we furnished air cover for a lot of them, but we'd travel in carrier groups, and the Essex was the big one that was with us. There was 3 or 4 CVEs and about a half a dozen destroyers, and we were supposed to protect the big guy that was in the middle of us, and we did. We were the one that got the hit, and I'll cover that in a minute. We furnished air cover for Hollandia down in New Guinea. It was south of the southern part of New Guinea, but and on Biak Island, right up on the equator. And speaking of the equator, I got to tell you this now. Some of you guys, I'm sure, have done it. Prior to going across the equator, you're a pollywog. Hey, he's smiling. He knows what I'm talking about. And once you cross you're a shellback. But to get across the war or no war, it's a ritual. Or for 2 days, you're initiated. They had just one thing they had from about here to that gray thing, a sock. And the sailmaker made it. It's about 3 feet square. And they filled that sucker full of garbage. And anything else they could find. You guys remember that. And you had to crawl through that. And as you were crawling through it, they had shillelaghs they'd made out of canvas and stuffed them with rags or something and drug them in the ocean, got them good in the salt water and hardened, and then they'd beat your butt off as you went crawling through it. Oh, I had black and blue spots for a month. But nobody talks about it. You don't. I don't know if you guys if you ever cross it, if you got it, if you ever hear of anybody talking about it. Hell, the war didn't stop them. They did it anyway. So, but anyway, I had to bring that up. That was. Whew. We island hopping. Was demanded because of, we started the Gilberts and the Marshalls, and then later turned them into filling stations. Hell, you went over there for fuel. But you worked closer and closer because of the air support for bombers. They were bombing Japan, but they couldn't, the fighter planes, they couldn't cover them. The island hopping, they would take these islands almost to give us, to give the Air Force, now I got it, support, air support. The fighters couldn't carry enough fuel to make a round trip. And they kept doing this and getting closer and closer. And when they got Iwo Jima and Okinawa, we were home free. We had them right there where it hurts. Let's see, here we go. Then we went into the Philippines, in Luzon Island and Lingayen Gulf. MacArthur returned in one of them, and I swear to Pete, I don't remember which one, but he was there. And this is the first time we experienced kamikaze flights. They had evidently, well, of course, after the, what was it, week, I think is where they destroyed sank 3 of their carriers, and it just eliminated their Air Force. And didn't eliminate it, but it put a bad hold on them. And then in the Philippines, after there was quite a battle there. We spent several days in there. After they eliminated all their fuel and their ammunition, they would dive into the ships. They felt that because it was a sin for them to surrender or to give up. And they wouldn't stop. I don't think it was planned that way, but that's what happened to them. In January in Iwo Jima, then February the 19th, in 45, when they landed there, and when we were in the Philippines, preparing for this Okinawa, right, because this was supposed to be the largest and the most active invasion that we've ever staged down there. And we were in the Philippines. There's a big naval base there, and I can't recall the name of it. But anyway, Subic Bay, that's it. I knew I'd get it. Thank you. We went, well, we were waiting there for maneuvers for this invasion, and they were in Iwo Jima. But when they got there, they bit off more than they could chew. That's the Americans I'm talking about. The island itself is nothing, you've heard this a million times, is volcanic ash. And these guys, they had been there, and it was very important that they get this because it had a airstrip on it already. And it was ready to go. We'd start using it immediately. But they had tunneled, miles and miles of tunnels on this thing. And what they would do, the troop carriers would unload their people, and they'd get them up on the beach, and then they'd open fire on them. Well, they called us, and we went up there. It was 2 days after D-Day for more air cover. Whether it helped or not, but they finally established. In fact, while I was on that, I did get to see the colors on Mount Suribachi. I didn't see them raise them, but we were out enough that we could see them. It was a glorious sight. It truly was. Then we went back to the Philippines to prepare for this Okinawa. It was a huge. They compared it to the one that they used in Europe and. Thank you. And they were just so many ships. It was unbelievable. You couldn't see the end of them. The casualties were high, and when we were there, this typhoon hit up there, and the Navy Department came out and made with an issue that you had to abandon this place because of the weather. And some of the ships, there was a couple of tankers there that weren't under the jurisdiction of the Navy. And when we went back, we ended up in China, but when we went back, there was 2 tankers up on the beach there. The wind had blown them up there, and there was 2 destroyers that had capsized. It's just horrible. I can remember the night, had to watch one night, and the screws of the ship, that's the propellers, were up out of the water half of the time. They just, you're up on top of these waves. This is when we went back. This is when the Japanese, I think, that at that time realized that their end of the war was about over. They were going to throw everything they had at us, and they did. That's when we got into the kamikaze planes, and they were sending just bunches of them. They weren't interested in strafing or bombing, or just find a carrier and sink it. Is what they were planning or hoping to do. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it or movies of it, of any aircraft fire and 40 millimeter and 5-inch, 50 calibers. Like at a 40 millimeter bracket, there's 5 or 6 shells. I think it's 6, and they're pretty good size. And every 5th one is a tracer, and you can see all of this light and all these tracers. You have to realize there's 5 in there that aren't even lit up. They're flying around too. But anyway, we had this guy in our sights, the ship, and he was on fire when he was coming at us. And you didn't have room to maneuver. The bay was just full of ships. And this guy just came down, and he was after us, or he was going to try to get the Essex, but he took us, and he hit the fantail, the after end of the ship. And we had this 5-inch AA gun back there. Well, we lost the whole crew, the ammunition holder, the loaders, and all of them. There were 6 of them. We only found 5. We buried those guys. We buried them at sea. And I don't know if you've ever witnessed that. I guess you haven't. You make a sack out of sailcloth and put a couple anchor chains in the bottom of it, and just trip to the war door and slide them into the ocean. It's not a nice sight. The whole crew was killed. We had the damage in head. Oh yes, that's when we took a lot of damage on this. We had an after engine room that was out of commission, and the drive shaft, I guess you could call it. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, we were on our way to Pearl for a dry dock. And we got to Pearl, they were full. So they sent us to Bremerton, Washington. And a little aside there, they promised us that we don't be there for 10 days because we had to go back. They were planning on going into the mainland of Japan at the time. And you Navy guys know this. It's all divided up in port and starboard liberty. And they told us that we would be in this dry dock in this Navy yard for 10 days. So they were giving each guy 5 days of liberty. Well, living over in the East, that wouldn't do. So it was all right to cut cards. Well, if a fellow from New York, named Jack Edwards, super guy, he cut cards with me. He gets my 10, or the 10, or I take it. Well, I won, and I got home for 10 days, and he stood all my watches. That's the way it worked, guys, really. And it was fair and square. The war in Europe was over, so everything there at that time was heading back to, heading for the Pacific. Everything they could find, they converted a lot of destroyers into minesweepers, because these guys had just loaded every port and every bay with mines. The Japs wouldn't listen. We wanted to surrender, and they wouldn't. practically told them what we were going to do. And that's when they dropped the bomb. Well, actually, two of them, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that was it. They decided then they'd had enough. They just wiped out the whole part. Japan's made up of little islands, and these cities are the main part of these particular islands, and they just wiped the whole thing out. Because we went up there, they had taken all of our planes and dumped them in the ocean and made us into a what they call a Class C hospital ship. And we were taking prisoners, Japanese prisoners. You know what, let me, this is, I think, true. Initially, when they were going into places like Guadalcanal, you talk about and you read about atrocities that are happening today over in the Middle East. It was terrible for what they were doing to us. If the ladies weren't present, I'd tell you some of the things that they did to these prisoners. And they got to the point that no more taking prisoners. Somebody mentioned, I think the young lady there, about these tortures they'd put down in these caves and burn these guys out. They wouldn't take them. As soon as they hit the air, they'd shoot them. But they did take prisoners initially, and they were taking a few later for information only. And they had this big, I guess a prison, I guess they could call it, in Guam. We were taking prisoners from Guam to Japan and picking up our prisoners. That when they were caught in Corregidor and Bataan at the start of the war. And I ran into a young fellow from Talmadge, a tall, red-headed guy. He was all bloated up, you know, from malnutrition. And he'd been working in a mine there. And he was telling us some stories that these guys, these little trains they had in these mines wouldn't work. And they, instead of trying to fix them, they would get clubs and beat the machines. Figured the machines were bad. But that's the way they thought. Then finally, you know, the end came. We were notified of it, that the war was over. And naturally, we were headed back to the States as fast as we could get there. We were at the mercy of the Navy on that. We spent some time in San Francisco. There's a big receiving station there. Maybe you guys remember that, Treasure Island. It was good duty. You'd muster in the morning, and if your name wasn't on the list, you were loose for the day. And the Pepsi-Cola building, they bought I think it was a big motel or a hotel in the upper end of San Francisco. And this is where everybody went. You could get free food, entertainment, but the first thing we'd muster in and then head up Pepsi-Cola building. We left there, and again on the train, you were at the mercy of transportation. You had to wait for transportation. And we finally got a train, and we went to all the way across. Just some of them World War I railroads. Really, they're terrible. And we started back, and we stopped. We stayed in Toledo. That's where we were discharged. Received our papers there. I ran into a fella that we went to school with, the old Akron Central, back in the 40s, and we came home together. We got into Cleveland, and this is where it started, and they dumped us there. Well, I say dumped us, they let us off, and it was probably 7:30, 8 o'clock at night in November, and no way to get home. And you've heard a lot about it now, about these guys coming back, and there's no big long parades for them, or no not welcome back. Well, John and I were together, and we got on, and that's before the expressways or the interstate system, but I think it's Route 176, if I'm not mistaken. It runs out of Cleveland into Akron, and through Richfield and that way. So we got on that. We had our sea bags with us, and we started thumbing. We'd been discharged. We were out of the Navy. We were going home. And there was a car stop and a young fellow and his girlfriend. And he was very interested in us. He, wanted to ask us questions. And he finally asked us where we were going, and we told him. And he talked to his lady friend for a little while. And by George, he took us all the way to Akron. Really did. And I thought that was the greatest thing. But that's the end of my story, guys. I'm glad to ask any questions or answer them if you'd like to. If not, thank you for your time, and it's been a pleasure. It really has.
I'd like to add something that he didn't hear about. There were 3 boys in their family, and they all 3 went to war. Can you imagine how that mother felt? Not knowing if those 3 boys would come home? Well, they all 3 came home.
Question.
Yeah, you used the term CDE at one point.
CVE.
CVE.
Uh-huh.
Right. What's that stand for exactly?
Well, the C is a carrier, the E is an escort. Now the V, I have no idea in the world what it stands for.
It's air.
Excuse me?
It's air.
Okay.
Those were smaller carriers, weren't they? Are those what they call Jeeps?
Well, yeah, anything small, they'd call it a Jeep. Most of them, the Navy would refer to us as a tin can because of the make. Jesus, you guys are in that coffin here. It wasn't a good piece of ship, but it made it. In fact, I've got I don't know if you remember this, maybe some of your older guys would. After the war, they tried to, remember they dropped the atom bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the Bikini Islands, they took a bunch of old ships down there and set off this bomb and to see what effect it would have on them. Well, the Savo Island was one of them. That's where it's down there in the ocean somewhere.
When you observed the fighting, Japanese Zeros coming in, and they were doing their kamikaze runs, did we have Corsairs that were battling them, and how intense was the fighting?
They were. I get it. I mentioned that the air fight, the tracers. It was just it was like the greatest fireworks show you ever did see. And I should make something. My battle station was midships. It was in a damage control locker. And of course, when the plane hit after, the ship fitter shop was back there, so I was quite familiar with that area. I could tell you something about that 5-inch gun too, but I won't. Destroyers were named after famous people, admirals and stuff like that. Cruisers were named after cities. Battleships were named after states. And carriers were named after battles. It's all changed now. Submarines used to be named after fish, but now they're naming them after cities. Anything else, guys? Yes, sir?
I have a question. We all know what the function of a carrier is, but what is a battleship by definition? What is a destroyer by definition? What is their specific purpose?
Well, I wish I could answer all that. I really can't. I know from a destroyer, a cruiser, and a battle wagon, they're called men of war. They're mostly destructive pieces of equipment. Where carriers would serve another purpose, and you have transports and cargo ships and all that. But this was the backbone of the Navy at the time. These destroyers, cruisers, and battleships. But
Was a destroyer, the purpose of a destroyer, was that to destroy another?
no, they were more maneuverable. They had more anti-aircraft firepower on them than anything. They had 5-inch guns and a lot of 40s. They were quick, they were fast, they were set down in the water low. I admired some of those guys. My young brother was on a destroyer while he was in the service. It's quite a ship. These guys probably remember that.
I was on the Aaron Ward, a destroyer, and it had twin 5-inch mounts, 2 of them forward and 1 aft, 40 millimeters and 20 millimeters primarily. We had a computer and a director that put us on target, and we went into Okinawa and we were hit by 6 kamikazes and 3 bombs at Picket Station 10 on May the 3rd, 1944. No,
45.
And
Yeah, because the landing at Okinawa was, I think, April the 1st, Fool's Day.
we went into dry dock, and we were dead in the water, and we went into a dry dock at Primaretto Bay and brought that ship. They wanted to scuttle us because we were leveled from number 1 stack aft. We lost about a third of our crew to dead and wounded, and they wanted to scuttle the ship. And our captain said, the USS Aaron Ward brought me and my men out here, and the USS Aaron Ward is going to take us home. And we brought the ship back 16,000 miles from Okinawa, and the west coast was all filled with, the dry docks were all filled up. So we went down through the Panama Canal to Brooklyn Navy Yard, and there they scrapped it and sold a $6 million ship for $37,000.
Well, you know, I've said this before, and you guys will all agree with me, I'm sure. War is something we had, this is alluded to in the Bible many times. We had a war, this World War II was the greatest, it was fought everywhere in every part of the world. And we're going to have wars forever, unfortunately. And if I had to do it again, I used to make a joke out of it. I said, shucks, I volunteered for something that took 3.5 years of my life out of me. I'd do it again to what they did to us. But the waste of not only of human life, so much, gee, it's unbelievable. You guys perhaps heard the story about the Indianapolis, what happened to her. But the material, and just like, I've told Peggy this a couple of times, and she can't believe it. We carried anywhere from 25 to 28 planes. We were small. They had a hangar deck that we went that too, but we had to throw all 25 of those airplanes over the side to make room for as a hospital ship. But the word came back that most all the carriers were doing this because that they didn't want to bring them back here and flood the market with them, a bunch of airplanes. But the waste was horrendous, just horrendous. You can see, we used to, the Navy had rules. You get it 1 day over on the beach for every 30 days at sea. And we carried our own beer. God, we had a cooler full of beer. You couldn't touch it on the ship. But they'd put it on the jitneys and take it over on the beach and use an old valve stem of a valve of an engine, sharpen the end of it, and punch a hole in the can and drink it. But it's just unbelievable, the waste. I think about it often.
Well, in World War II, there were 60 countries that were involved in that battle. And it was either kill or be killed.
Yeah. Well, in World War I, they allude to it as World War I, but it was fought in France. Most of the action was made in France. But this was in Africa and Europe, it was in Asia, everywhere. Everywhere. They say that in the wartime service that 95% of it is boredom and 5% of it is fear. And that just about stirs it up. Sometimes you're scared right out of your drawers. The other time they're trying to find things for you to do. Chip paint or paint something or swab something. But the waste is always, I've always thought about it. It's just unbelievable.
What did you do after the war?
Oh, God, as little as possible. But I wasn't married then. And they had at that time, World War II, they had a mustering out pay. They gave you $300, $100 a month for the first 3 months. And when I got my last $100, I said, I got to go to work. And of course, my mom, bless her heart, she was dying of cancer and I wasn't aware of it. And she died as she was 51 years old. I got home just in time. But it was just, I didn't know whether to go to school or not. And a lot of the friends were going, started at Akron U in Kent. And I just wasn't ready. I didn't know what the world to do, seriously. And I went out to Goodyear. And hell, I was walking along the sidewalk. I felt somebody grab me by the collar and drug me in there, give me a job. They were looking for help. And I stayed in there about 3 months. And boy, I couldn't take it any longer. I had to get out. I spent 35 years with General Mills. I was in sales at a super company, Wheaties and Cheerios. And I did very well. Have furthered my education a little bit. Never did get a degree. But it's been a full life, and I have no regrets. I'm 90, I'll be 91 years old in a couple of months, and I don't feel I was cheated at all. I've had a good life. I've taken some knocks, but I've enjoyed what I've been had. Thanks again, guys. I appreciate it.